This is episode 10 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. Today's guests are Afnan and Brandon from OpenNode. Today they talk with us about the Lightning Network and how they see it unfolding over the next few years. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. And now, here's the episode. All right, so we have the co-founders of OpenNode here today for this episode of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. And go ahead, guys. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I would say I got into Bitcoin, and I'm Brandon, one of the co-founders here at OpenNode. I would say I got into Bitcoin right around the same time that I was kind of questioning the state of the world. I was working at Belcan at the time, really excited about IoT and interested in how design kind of works on a large scale when it comes to shaping society. Through that journey, I kind of was sick of it. I was working at a place I didn't believe in. It was that typical story of wanting to do something that you're truly passionate about. So kind of through that journey, I linked up with Afnan, and Afnan's actually been into Bitcoin since 2014, and he was the first person to talk to me about it. And we had this idea of creating a design studio that focused on some of these big scale problems. I would say naturally, going through the process of creating that company, we stumbled upon this huge opportunity in Bitcoin and kind of bridging the gap between this technology and the rest of the world. The studio we founded was Mason, and that kind of led us down to where OpenNode is formed. But I would say that journey started in 2016.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm Afnan, the other co-founder of OpenNode. Like Brandon mentioned, I've been in Bitcoin for a few years now, and I actually got in pretty much right after I graduated out of from UCSB. At the time, one of my best friends, one of my childhood best friends, just started mining. And he told me hey man, there's this new tech out right now that you can make a shit ton of money on. And I was okay, let me tell me more. And then he kind of he already had a warehouse set up with servers, and he was showing me the whole process. And I remember going there with my I just had my calculator app on my phone, just doing the math and being wait a second, you're gonna make so much money doing this. And but he did that for about a year, ended up not being profitable after electricity costs and all the other things that go into why people stop mining. But that was kind of the start of me going down this rabbit hole of what is Bitcoin, why it's important, what money is, and how that ties into just how the world works. And so the learning process for me was about 2 years of just just diving deep and just reading a bunch of everything, and then linking up with Brandon and realizing okay, he has this design talent. I kind of knew how the agency space works, and we kind of decided okay, creating a design agency focused on Bitcoin was something that no one else is doing, and it's also a huge problem that needs to be solved. Because we're all in Bitcoin, we all know and love the technology and what it stands for and what it's going to provide for us. But the reality is if it's not usable, it doesn't really matter how sick the tech is or how revolutionary. So that's kind of why we thought that this design agency Mason was just so important. We got validated along the way. One of the first kind of Lightning Network projects we worked on was with Jack Mallers. He dropped a Medium article just basically saying hey, I'm creating this consumer-facing Lightning Network wallet. Anyone who wants to help, just give me a shout out. And me and Brandon saw that, and we're just hey, this guy's onto something. No one else is doing this. And we also liked the vibes of what Mallers was trying to do, and kind of just how he was portraying himself. So we hit him up, just a cold email. I was hey, we're down to work on this project with you. And that kind of started our introduction to Lightning Network. Me and Brandon were the second and third contributors. He was handling the tech, we were kind of handling design. And the fourth contributor to that project was actually our other co-founder, Joao Almeida, who's our CTO. So yeah, so we worked on the Zap wallet, worked on that for a few months. I'm not sure if you guys saw, but when Stark went on Bloomberg, they actually had like a screenshot of the Zap wallet buying like one of those like faux Starbucks, Starbucks coffees. I forgot, Starblocks is I think is what it was called. And like obviously the whole team was super hyped about the fact that this open source project we were working on is on Bloomberg, and then we were kind of like, okay, so this is kind of like a validation for us that our design focus is something that's necessary, it's needed, and we kind of were like, okay, what's the next step for onboarding users into the space? And it's kind of naturally we're like, okay, we have a consumer facing wallet now. It's we positioned ourselves to create an easy solution for merchants and businesses to kind of enter this space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like, I mean, shout out to Mallers and the Zap wallet. The thing is really slick. It's really slick. I saw their point of sale interface. It looks great. I'm really excited to see the Zap wallet out in the wild for sure. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about how you see that integration for merchants and the business that you were just talking about and getting them onboarded onto Lightning, and where that fits in with OpenNode.
Yeah, so I mean, early on, I would say with Mason and just Lightning in general, we saw what the technology was and what it would kind of enable. So we did a lot of research to industries that really didn't even understand Bitcoin at the time, but industries that we thought would be, great use cases for this technology and for Lightning Network. So that was kind of like our, I would say, market research in a sense to see, if Golden Voice, if we can get payments in Coachella, if we can get payments into the art industry in any way, if we can get, Bitcoin payments in football games, soccer games. And so we just did a lot of cold outreach in the beginning, and it wasn't the most profitable thing. I think we probably lost a lot of money through the process because at the same time we were saying no to ICO money and kind of really just focusing on Bitcoin projects altogether. But this research kind of gave us that understanding of the business need here. It gave us understanding of what type of user would need a custodial service for something like this, and integrating it in their existing network. So that was I would say that was the first point to understand, is understanding the needs of this user base, understanding the needs of kind of like these business use cases that were already kind of ripe at the time. But we didn't really have a packaged solution. And that was kind of the tipping point. We're like, okay, we need to actually start our own solution.
Yeah, and at that time, like while doing that research, so Joao, our other co-founder, he actually created the first WooCommerce plugin for the Lightning Network, and that was kind of what kind of jump started us forming OpenNode, just because we realized that a lot of the users and a lot of businesses we're talking to, they loved the technology. They love like the advantages of Bitcoin over and the asset class over fiat. But at the same time, they didn't have the wherewithal or the resources or time to kind of set up their own node. To even understand what channels were, to even understand how to in terms of like where to get where to handle their fiat on ramps for. So we decided that OpenNode, because like I said, us working on Zap, we're all about decentralization, the values of Bitcoin. When we wanted to create OpenNode, we wanted to create something that was non-custodial. That's something that that was decentralized, but we realized that there was a lot of user experience challenges that came with creating a non-custodial application that would make it hard for someone who doesn't know about tech to come into this space very quickly and very easily. So that's kind of why OpenNode is the infrastructure and why it's custodial. It's because we're kind of abstracting the Lightning Network, we're abstracting Bitcoin in general and just making it kind of like a one-click solution for anyone that just wants to monetize anything online or in person, where they can just all they really need is a valid email address and they're basically ready to go. OpenNode's business plan, like OpenNode's business is basically that we host your Bitcoin node, we host your Lightning Network node, we handle all of your channels, connections, we handle liquidity, and also one of the big advantages for us of being like one of the first movers in the space is that our nodes are heavily connected. So and if you're not aware, the way Lightning Network works is that you technically don't need to be connected to the party that you're paying or the party that you're receiving funds from directly, as long as you guys have a mutual node. And because we were early movers, we have most of the biggest applications and products and companies in this space connected to our node. So now any person who signs up for an OpenNode account and they're one of our merchants, they are able to make the experience for their customers a lot easier, because their customers, when they come onto their site, they don't have to open a direct channel. More likely than not, they're already connected through some other mutual hop. So that experience is fairly easy and fairly simple. So for us, it's about how do we make this solution so easy that my mom can come on, sign up for an OpenNode account, create a quick invoice, and get paid on Lightning or via Bitcoin on chain. And that's kind of same thing to go. So that's also reflected with like our pricing model. We're basically not taking any fees right now from any of our users. We're giving out $10,000 of free processing for anyone who signs up, because our goal here is to just onboard as many businesses, as many people onto the Lightning Network. And we feel like this kind of custodial solution that we have is the intermediary, kind of like the fix for now. I hope that as time goes on and people become more educated about private keys, about why it's so important to be your own bank, that everyone's going to shift over to a non-custodial kind of decentralized solution. But for the time being, there needs to be a solution like ours in the space to allow people who aren't really tech savvy to kind of offset that risk onto a third party like us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially because of the big debate between, a custodial versus a non-custodial Lightning node specifically. And I just saw that some commentary about that over the last couple of days. And I mean, you make a good point that at some point you might want to bridge that gap where eventually you'd have, the goal would be to have the majority of people using a non-custodial wallet and running their own nodes. But since we were on the topic of opening channels, can you give us a high-level explanation just for our listeners on what the Lightning Network is and how it's different from Layer 1?
Yeah, so like you said, the layer one is the on-chain transactions that everyone's used to, where you're dealing with the mempool, you're dealing with block sizes, you're dealing with confirmation times. Lightning Network is a second layer protocol built on top of Bitcoin that basically allows for fast, cheap payments, like directly between two parties. So I'll just kind of go high level. Basically, there's like a multi-sig address that's set up. And if you don't know what a multi-sig address is, it just means that you need more than one key or one person to authorize a transaction. So that address is saved to the public blockchain, and that includes what they call like a smart contract. And it's just a fancy word for a balance sheet. And that balance sheet just proves like how much Bitcoin belongs to who on that sheet. So that smart contract is like the payment channel that's created between two parties. And that payment channel is where you can kind of send unlimited amount of transactions. And because it's on the second layer, you don't ever need to broadcast those transactions to the first layer. And that first layer requires you to, like I said again, deal with mempools, deal with block sizes, and deal with like confirmation times. So by not having to broadcast them, you're able to make as unlimited amount of transactions for basically almost near zero fees, because since you're not having to deal with, like I said, mempools and block sizes.
Like what was just described, that's the use case of two parties paying. But the interesting thing about Lightning is it is a network, and you can have routed payments through different nodes. Those are basically called hops, and a set of hops constitutes a route. So you don't have to necessarily just set up one channel with, let's say, Starbucks. You can set up a third intermediary to kind of help route payments to anyone that they're connected. So it kind of runs in a truly centralized manner through these hops in a trustless way. So I don't necessarily have to be connected to anyone I'm trying to transmit with. It's mostly who are they connected to the network and who am I kind of bouncing off of in this kind of in this like hop system.
Exactly. So basically, like two people can have a payment channel with like a mutual node, as I was saying before, and they'll be able to route payments through that mutual node, even though they're not directly connected. And that's because you're not broadcasting those transactions to the first layer.
What new business models do you see being enabled by the Lightning Network?
I would say that one of the biggest advantages of Lightning is the non-custodial payment methods. And what that means is basically where you don't have to trust like a random website or application with like your personal information, like any of these credit cards or PayPal that you have to deal with. So like, for example, one of our lead developer actually created a game called Lightning Spin a few months back, basically to showcase this like concept of non-custodial, where you can basically go on the site and play roulette, and you basically bet or pay per spin. And for you to pay per spin, no information is required on the user's side. You basically just type in how much you want to wager, what color you want, hit spin, and a QR code pops up. You scan the QR code, and either you win or lose. If you win, it asks for your Lightning Network address, and you get paid out. That's kind of, this is kind of revolutionary in the fact that, think about any sort of these like gambling sites that requires you to trust the site owners, because more likely than not, you're going to have to deposit funds in order to kind of interact or play with the site. So you're kind of being able to remove that trust and that risk by creating these like non-custodial methods. And this is only possible with Lightning and not on chain because of the instant settlements. If you don't have instant settlements and you have the same game on Lightning, or if you have the same Lightning Spin, this roulette game on chain, the user would come on, scan a QR code, and would basically be staring at their monitor for 10 minutes until the payment actually settles, and then they're able to kind of interact. So Lightning allows this non-custodial payment method to happen because of instant settlements.
Yeah, and another thing I like to kind of bring up all the time is microtransactions. I think that with the disruptive technology, you're going to get use cases you don't really fully understand at the offset of it, and that's what we're most excited about. We don't really know what models are going to be made with microtransactions, but right now there's a lot of, I would say, trustless experiments going on in Lightning Network that we're really excited about and want to help enable. There's a lot of examples. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Patreon, but there's examples of people creating a similar solution, but with microtransactions and with LN that kind of removes that trust layer in that fee model that Patreon kind of forces on its users. And there's a multitude of different games being built in this space that are really interesting. Afnan just mentioned Lightning Spin, which I would recommend anyone check out if they want to get a good taste of that microtransaction model. But yeah, it's hard to say exactly what's going to be built in this space. It's just now we have the tools to enable that, and I think there's going to be a lot of underlying innovation of many people trying to see what they can leverage with this technology in the coming months and years.
And I don't know if we explained this, but microtransactions is basically defined as like being able to charge for something for like less than a cent. Because we're in Bitcoin, or because Bitcoin's unit of account goes to the Satoshi level and soon to be like sub-Satoshi level, these microtransactions and these micro payment models of like, paying like an eighth of a cent for an interaction, it's revolutionary. But it's also so revolutionary that it's hard to be like, oh, we know exactly how this new business model will take off. We see the gaming industry right now, and they're kind of the ones leading the way with microtransactions in terms of like in-app purchases, in-game purchases. But even that definition of microtransaction from the gaming industry is being redefined with Lightning Network. So, I think that the biggest use case, even in LN, that we're seeing right now is going to be these is going to be like game developers creating these new use cases. But it's also hard to say because one of the leading microtransaction applications was like Y'alls, which is kind of like a medium-esque platform where you're basically not only getting rid of the subscription model, but and doing microtransactions for a paywall, but you're also creating experiences within that in terms of like I'm going to buy a heart-shaped emoji to give props to this writer, or a smiley face, and that's an interaction in itself. Or if I want to leave a comment, it's going to be a microtransaction for that. So these are all concepts out, and it's great. There's a lot of great volume, and people are using these things, but it's hard for us to kind of say exactly how it's going to pan out. But like Brandon said, we have a solution for it. So we're kind of letting our users kind of show us the way that this kind of going to unfold.
Yeah, I mean, all that makes me really excited about Lightning. There's two things that I really like about it. One is that from both the merchant and the consumer standpoint, you no longer have to provide personal information, which wouldn't be possible otherwise without Bitcoin. And then secondly, Lightning can enable new use cases that just weren't possible before, or it would be very cost prohibitive to do microtransactions prior to that. So this kind of allows us to see whether or not the microtransaction streaming payment business models will end up really taking off, and if that makes sense to the user. Can they get over the mental thought structure of thinking about payments being streaming, and how much is this going to cost me, and what do those business models look like?
Exactly.
It's something you guys mentioned earlier, and I would have said something, but you guys were on quite a roll there. I think a big thing, and I'm sure we all know, Andreas Antonopoulos talks about unbanking, and it's a funny thing because as I assume you guys are from the West or westernized world, where we all have banks, and we all have bank accounts, savings, checkings, but for the better part of close to 6 billion, 5 billion people are basically unbanked and aren't connected onto a SWIFT international banking system. And I would just what are your guys' thoughts on how Lightning Network and Bitcoin helps that and just solves that huge issue there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's kind of the biggest reason why we're in here, right? Is to help the people who don't really have a solution to finance. And right now, we're actually working with Bitcoin Venezuela Initiative to kind of help solve that problem. And that's something that we're actively looking into in helping the unbanked and helping people who are experiencing kind of these radical shifts in their economic policy. But I would say for us, it's to continue to provide them the tools. You have to make a conscious attempt at tackling these problems early on, and that's just something we've had since the beginning.
Exactly. BTC Venezuela was like one of our first big users. For those who don't know, Randy Brito is actually kind of heading that initiative, and it started off as just using OpenNode to receive donations for kind of their food bank, and it turned into them using our API to create kind of like a Lightning Network wallet for their users out there. So we're helping Randy out and kind of just seeing how the Venezuelans are using Lightning Network, and it's still kind of unfolding right now. It's hard to say exactly where it's at, but what I'm saying is that OpenNode is all about giving access to the second and third world, and that's kind of why for our sign up, there's no KYC required for our product, because we know that these people, that's something that they're faced with every other payment processor. So for anyone looking to just use Bitcoin, no KYC is required. Like I said before, all you really need is a valid email address. And we're actually about to launch we're actually dropping a new feature today or probably tomorrow that basically allows, for those who don't even have a website, you'll be able to basically create an invoice that you can send to someone. It's kind of like a payment page, like a custom checkout, basically. So, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're just like on the go, whether you have a website or not, you'd be able to send someone a payment request. But yeah, it kind of ties into, this overarching concept of the fact that, we're here to kind of enable the second and third world. Like, it's cool if everyone in America can use Lightning, and we have all these cool games, Pokitoshi, and like, that's awesome. I'm not opposed to that. But the main use case here is to provide financial services to those who don't have access to that right now. And that's kind of why we're looking to also partner with certain exchanges that gives us on ramps to certain countries. Like, for example, like one of the big problems right now for merchants is the fact that because of Bitcoin's price volatility, it's hard for them to keep their assets in Bitcoin. I'm not talking about Venezuela, other countries, especially like in the Middle East. For them, they need some sort of fiat on-ramp. They need some sort of fiat exchange. So we're heavily pursuing multiple banking partners right now to be able to allow a Bitcoin to fiat exchange for those merchants that need to reduce, Bitcoin's price volatility when it comes to, paying their bills or what have you. So that's also something that we're looking closely into, is that obviously we have our, we have our platform where it's no KYC for Bitcoin users, but we're also, we understand the current climate of Bitcoin, and just the fact that, Bitcoin isn't where it needs to be, where people are only transacting with Bitcoin and no fiat at all. So we're actively pursuing multiple banking partnerships to allow these kind of fiat on-ramps for some of these second and third world countries as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm always thinking about, certain business models, and some of them, I question, do they not make sense in more of a post hyper Bitcoinization, landscape where people aren't going back and forth to fiat as much. I know there's a handful of people on the planet who are living solely on Bitcoin, and I give them a lot of credit for doing so, but dealing with the price volatility makes it a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, 100%. One of our first bank partners was Wire. They're actually also in Draper's portfolio. Basically, they gave us access to like 25 different regions, 25 different currencies. We're talking to Cumberland Mining right now, and also B2C2, and also a couple exchanges as well to see, basically we're trying to decentralize our banking partners. It's hard for us to say it's a goal for us to service as many regions and many currencies as possible, and also basically have multiple options in the case that something happens with any of these banking partners, or they have certain regulations that kind of doesn't allow them to service some of our users. So we're looking to have as many partners as possible to service as many people, and also just de-risk our kind of banking relationships.
So we were going to ask about privacy and the difference between layer 1 and layer 2, which is Lightning Network, and what's different about them, basically.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, privacy on Lightning is, I would say, even more private than on chain, just because, like I said before, you're not having to broadcast your transactions to the public ledger, which is the first layer. So currently payments are routed through whether it be one hop or several hops. And the routing node they only know the source and the next destination of the payment that they're routing. So even within the Lightning Network, the nodes that are routing the information, they don't even have full knowledge of where the payment started and where it's ending. So that's kind of similar to Tor or I2P. One of the like FUD claims that were coming out was that chain analysis can be ran to see like, okay, at least we're going to be able to tell like who has a Lightning Network channel open and who's kind of going from on-chain to Lightning. Recently, a new updates being added. It's known as 2P ECDSA, and it's basically like what they call like scriptless scripts, and it basically privatizes the channel opens and the closes. So it basically makes it impossible for like a company like Chain Analysis or really anyone to like do the math to figure out like which addresses are associated with Lightning and which addresses are associated with just a regular on-chain transaction. So it's kind of asphyxiating that as well. So it's going to be near impossible to determine, who's on Lightning and who's not.
Yeah, and a good point also is that you can also host your node to be private, so where it doesn't appear on the Lightning Network map. In that case, you won't be like routing any payments, and would like most likely have a direct channel with like another private node to increase anonymity and privacy. So think of it like another kind of ecosystem that's private and unseen from basically the whole network, where you can transact between one another. So it's a huge step for privacy, I think.
Do you think we'll see more like coin join transactions into Lightning channels to increase privacy even more?
When they're going from Lightning to an on-chain transaction, I can see that definitely. Like every time you're leaving the Lightning Network, I can see you going into a coin join, or even like when you're onboarding on the Lightning Network, going through a coin join. I can definitely see that. I can see everything moving towards a coin join, honestly.
Yeah, especially if they're going to end up being arguably cheaper to transact with a Schnorr upgrade in the future.
Exactly.
You mentioned a little bit about Lightning FUD. Is there any common misconceptions about Lightning that you guys would want to clear up for anybody?
Oh yeah, I mean the first one that's the most ridiculous is people not understanding that Lightning is Bitcoin. When people say Lightning is not Bitcoin, I kind of just close my ears. I can't really answer that. That's just so untrue. But I think that's like the biggest disconnection. People think Lightning is its own coin, or it has somehow a completely different value proposition as Bitcoin, and that's just untrue.
Also, I think one of the Lightning FUD that's out right now is that, and that's also it's not really FUD, it's actually true, is that Lightning is reckless. That hashtag is trending amongst crypto Twitter, and it's true. It isn't fully safe yet. To kind of have a large amount of funds on in your channels, just because these are people having to deal with node up times, and they're dealing with hardware. But I would say that the LND, at least for the LND team, they're about to actually add in channel backups. I would think before the quarter ends. Don't quote me on that, but I think that once we have channel backups, this kind of notion of Lightning being reckless, I think it'll start to kind of, I don't want to say die off, but slow down, just because losing funds on LN won't really be an issue after that. I think another thing is that people talk about is like routing issues, and I think that's actually a true statement. A lot of people are having those issues, but I think that has a lot to do with just the fact that the network is kind of small, it's still growing. It's and also with like the user experience in wallets, and people having to deal with like autopilot and not knowing which nodes to connect to, or connected to nodes that don't really have big uptime. So that kind of disconnect kind of leads to people having routing failures, just by them not being able to understand that. But I think again, as the UX with wallets increases, gets better, and the network kind of grows, and I think that those routing issues will definitely be solved.
Yeah, and I just like to really add real quick in terms of the whole reckless thing. I think any new technology, there's going to be risk involved in the beginning. Like people understand this is still the infancy of this network, and it has a lot of developing to do. And there's a lot of active development every day into growing this and scaling it for sustainability. And I think usually the FUD that comes out, it's kind of misinterpreting that this is going to grow, and that you're looking at an infant, you should be looking at him growing into an actual adult. Like it's just the wrong stage for that. So most FUD I don't really listen to really. It's mostly for us, we just focus on building and focus on creating something that will last, and creating something that will create a delightful experience for the end user. That's all we really do.
But I would say that the one thing that I think the space is lacking is like better user experience in the wallet game. Like whether that be a browser extension or just a desktop or mobile. Like I think there's a lot of things to do to make that experience smoother. And the example and analogy I like to use is like, is this easy enough for my mom to use? And I think that there's like cool wallets coming out, Blue Wallet's out. A lot of people are downloading that on the App Store. They're doing a great job. And like I said, like we're getting there, but I think that's kind of like the weak point right now in LN. Apart from also, like I said, just upgrades that we're having on a protocol level. But those guys at LNG, roast beef, like they're killing it. So I have faith that what's going to happen with the protocol and the upgrades is going to be timely. They tell us something's going to be ready in like 2 years or a year and a half, but really it's like ready to go in like a quarter or two. So I have faith in the protocol devs. Now it's just kind of up to the designers and developers working on these applications to kind of harness the raw Lightning Network protocol and make a smooth, easy application anyone can use.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to more usable wallets, and it's tough because I have that decision to make. Do I want to get onboarded onto Lightning by running something like the Casa setup and be running a full node and a Lightning node? And they just released their browser extension today, I think, and it looks really slick, but you get stuck. It's almost like you want to be a fast follow for a user. So from my perspective, I'm almost watching and waiting for to figure out how I want to onboard myself onto the Lightning Network. And then you have everybody else who's doesn't know Bitcoin as well, who, what's their first interaction with Bitcoin going to look like? Will it be layer 1 or layer 2? And I'm starting to feel like it'll end up being layer 2. The next wave of new users might not be joining or doing their first transactions on chain.
Yeah, I agree. Like looking at these custodial wallets, just imagine like a custodial wallet partnering or like having some sort of API access where I can come on, download this application, link up my Chase account, and the money I have in my Chase account is what I'm now using to interact with Lightning Network applications. But for me, it looks like a Venmo, but really, I'm using Lightning Network. So I mean, there's a lot to do, but we're getting there, and things are moving a lot faster than we expected.
Are there any new features coming to Lightning that you guys are excited about?
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, BIP 21 with Bolt 11 support, basically the one QR code that can be read by both on-chain and Lightning Network wallets is really cool from a user experience point of view.
Yeah, so like right now, there's 2 different QR codes. So with this new BIP 21 added to Bolt 11 is kind of makes it so that whether you have an on-chain mobile, whether you have an on-chain wallet or a Lightning Network wallet, that when you're scanning a QR code, it'll be able to read both and give you the option to kind of send on whichever layer you want.
So having to make that distinction is much easier now. Now before I had to choose between on-chain and Lightning, and with this BIP and Bolt support, that it's really just one QR code I have to focus on. So that for our point of view, really it improves the user experience.
And also like when we were testing out, like in the Bitcoin community, it's fine. Everyone in the Bitcoin community understands on-chain and Lightning, but outside, literally no one understands on-chain. So when they come across 2 options of on-chain and Lightning, they're just like, what am I doing here? What's next? So kind of obfuscating these options and just kind of being able to combine them is a huge step forward.
So people listening understand when they say BIP, BIP stands for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, just so people like listening who don't understand Bitcoin at all will understand what BIP 21 means.
Yeah, and also the Sphinx send. So essentially right now how Lightning works is if I want to send a payment, I have to generate a payment request, and I then have to send that payment request to someone who then has to scan the payment request or open it up in their Lightning Network wallet. That's very different to how kind of currently people interact with money, especially mobile wallets. They just send in an address and they send it to the person, kind of like how on-chain payments work. But with Sphinx, you'll be able to now push Lightning Network payments the same way you would push on-chain transactions. So that's also another really big user experience improvement we see coming.
And then I think I think it was like last month, like the Wumbo proposal, basically increasing channel limits. Right now, I think there's like a $500 limit. I think it's like 0.16 or 0.016 BTC limit on channels right now on in the Lightning Network. A lot of our users that transact over that kind of want the option to collect their funds via Lightning, but are unable to, and that's not a bug. It's more that it was actually put in place by the protocol devs to just kind of maintain, just to ensure that if people are acting reckless, they're not losing too much money. But I think with this proposal and with the protocol kind of developing out, I think this is going to be a great step forward for Lightning usage, kind of like on a large volume scale. Outside of that, I would say AMPs and splicing. AMPs are atomic multipath payments. So like right now, you can only send an amount that fits within like your channel capacity limit that you set between you and another party. So when you set up a payment channel, you're basically staking up these coins that kind of sets your limit between how much you can send or how much you can receive. With AMP, you'll be able to do like multiple partial payments through like different channels, but you're not losing any security doing that. So now you don't have to just how much you can send to one person isn't defined by how many coins you staked up for that direct channel. You can have like 10 channels and be able to use the limits on all of those different channels and be able to send partial payments through those channels to get to that one receiver. And like I said, again, you're not losing any of the security doing that. And I said splicing. So like right now, Lightning Network wallets have like both on-chain and off-chain balances. So once splicing is like fully integrated to the protocol, users will be able to send on-chain transactions from their Lightning Network or their off-chain balances. Like basically splicing will allow users to like directly deposit into like channels. We'll be able to directly deposit into channel addresses. So this is going to improve like your routing efficiency to the network, and it also like provides like flexibility in terms of like, oh, I want my channel balance to be increased or decreased for this person or that person. So it's going to make the channel balancing and the routing a lot simpler. So basically, like with AMP and splicing, you basically get to remove like all of your worries in terms of like managing liquidity. All of these things will kind of like be automated. And these are all great improvements. And for people who aren't really looking into the tech, you're not going to have to care about AMPs or splicing or Wumbo. For you, all of this kind of stuff is going to be abstracted, whether you're using a Lightning Network wallet or you're paying for something via Lightning with a merchant that accepts LN.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see a lot of these upgrades to Lightning, and I think it's going to do a lot to enable those new use cases that we're kind of waiting to see how they play out. And I'm really excited to see how business models will change, especially from like a streaming service standpoint, or content creators monetizing in different ways where they don't have to. Well, for two things. One, they just increase their market globally. So anybody that they don't have to be in the same country as you to pay you or transact with you. So you kind of open that door to a global economy, which is awesome. And also because it can enable you to monetize in ways that you couldn't have done otherwise through advertising or whatever. We might finally see that shift on the internet away from the advertising model completely, which would be fantastic to see, assuming everyone's willing to then pay for their content. We have to see if they're willing to make that trade-off, I guess. So what excites you guys most about Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's essentially a way to kind of opt out of our current unsustainable monetary system. We're millennials. We grew up in this system, kind of confused about its inefficiencies and why it was able to run for as long as it did. And we never really saw a way out. This it's just the way of the world. Until Bitcoin, that is, until we realized that we actually have a solution as a society to kind of leave, and that's super powerful. Because this current system, it's destroying our potential to evolve. It's destroying our potential as a species to kind of get to the next step. It's actually, for me, the fear of the future is kind of shedded. Bitcoin has allowed me to feel light and optimistic about, the next 50, 100 years. And that's what it's really about for us. It's about a sustainable system that humans can use to transact value. And that's I would say is the most needed thing in this current time frame.
Yeah, like what Brandon said, basically, I think that everyone's gonna have a point when they're gonna kind of like a light bulb will, turn on in their head, like, hey, like this is fucked up, like how things are working right now. This is not okay. This doesn't make any sense. And I remember when I first kind of had that realization, I was feeling kind of apathy, and it's kind of like, okay, what do I do? How do we fix this? And like having Bitcoin and knowing about it at that time was kind of just like, kind of like a savior that like, oh, okay, all of these problems can be significantly solved because of this technology. Like, awesome, I'm going to devote all my time and resource and energy into building this out, helping build this out, and promoting it. So I think what's exciting about Bitcoin is that like I don't want to say it's a cure-all, but it's a significant solution to a lot of the issues that we're facing. So I think that that's honestly what Bitcoin's done for me, and I think a lot of people are gonna kind of go through that same like flow of understanding and becoming aware that things are wrong, and how the system is, and understanding that there's a solution out right now, which you couldn't really say before 2011.
Yeah, and just to really piggyback off that, a big reason why we got in the beginning was out of fear, because we saw the effects of our current monetary system, and we saw what would happen when it crashes. I think 2008 was just a taste of that. If you look at what's going on now, same bullshit. So, how do we protect ourselves was always the first question, and Bitcoin is that protection, and it gives me security. So I'm just excited about this experiment. I'm excited to see it grow.
Yeah, and also like outside of like the solution that Bitcoin has. Another thing that excites me most is the fact that this global currency is going to help unite people in general. Like back when Open Bazaar was actually cool, there was like North Koreans like selling things on there. Like regardless of how you feel about North Koreans, like the fact that they have an ability to let people who are in sanctioned countries have the ability to transact with their fellow human across the world, like that's amazing, and that's something that we want to help enable, we want to help promote. So this idea, this concept of like unifying people with a currency is also amazing to me.
Yeah, we definitely agree with you there. I mean, the environment that we're in, and when you start, Bitcoin was my rabbit hole moment for me to jump down and figure out what money actually is, and you realize what the system's really built on and how scary it is, and you're right, you're looking for that protection, and everybody kind of values that protection in a different way, and it'll be awesome to see Bitcoin work, especially Venezuela is a great example of people using Bitcoin for a real use case of storing their value and protecting themselves against inflation and the horrors of fiat money.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I think and we could all agree in this, I think most people are completely ignorant to the current financial system we have, how it works, how money works, where that money's made, what backs it, etc. And I think we've all been there because we've been in Bitcoin, and I think it's inevitable you end up running through monetary policy and you understand how broken the fiat monetary system is.
All right, last thing, one or two predictions on how you see Bitcoin playing out over the next 5 to 10 years. Not a price prediction. I would never put you guys on the spot for that.
I want a price prediction for December 1st, 2019 right now.
But more just about like, where do you see this going? Everybody has a different vision of Bitcoin, right? I have a different vision than you. You have a different vision than me, and how all this plays out. But I think the listeners would appreciate just to hear how people who are in the space, where do they see all this unfolding?
That's a hard question. I think that, our goal here is to onboard the world, and we're doing what we can to kind of shorten the amount of time till we have hyper Bitcoinization, and that's kind of been our motto and our kind of our driving force, and our product decisions, our design decisions, and like what is the quickest way to onboard merchants, people, anyone to the Lightning Network, to Bitcoin. So with those values in mind, we're looking to, like I said, I don't know exactly what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years, but I see massive onboarding onto the Bitcoin network, and OpenNode is going to be one of the driving forces and reasons for that. Like our team is literally day in and day out, just that's literally the question we're asking ourselves constantly, is like, what steps can we take to onboard millions of people, whether that be in America or South America, China, wherever it be. So I see hyper Bitcoinization happening in the next 10 years. I don't see fiat. I mean, hyper Bitcoinization probably is, I think part of the definition is that fiat is dead. I wouldn't say that fiat is dead in 10 years. But I do see like a majority of people like at least knowing about Bitcoin and having some Bitcoin, and merchants, especially with like how Stripe, PayPal, and these kind of payment processors have been acting. Like I see a lot of just merchants having a Lightning Network, whether it be their own node or a custodial solution, just because that's going to be their only way to really transact and sell to people outside of their local community.
Yeah, and it's exciting too, right? Because if Bitcoin does last in 2 years, which are all obviously banking on, the trust model there would be much stronger than just now. I think I see a lot of different industries who now are, Bitcoin, it's going to die. In 10 years, those arguments are going to be much weaker. And just if you look at convergence of other cryptocurrencies who have this value proposition of being better than Bitcoin, their network effects are going to diminish and drop as well, and they're going to converge into Bitcoin. And so I think we're going to just get a lot of great talent and ideas brewing in this space from people who are coming from different aspects of life. And I think that's going to, bring this technology in a place that we don't even understand right now. And I do see it becoming a medium of like everyday transactions, even more so than cash or fiat currency, because it just kind of blends with the internet so well, and it is a much better way to transact value across anything really. So I think people are going to understand that more as time goes, especially as trust in the network continues to evolve. And we see this as we see the future of Bitcoin being used for just everyday life, just on a human level. Something that isn't complicated, isn't confusing, isn't technical, but is normal and common. And that's something we're pushing for. And I think in the next 10 years, we'll see a really big push in that direction.
Well, guys, this is great. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. Why don't you tell the listeners where they can learn more about OpenNode and where they can follow you on any social media?
Yeah, so I think we're really active on Twitter. It's OpenNode Co. At Twitter, OpenNode at OpenNode Co. And also our website, OpenNode.co. And if you have any questions, any feedback, feel free to reach out. I mean, we're always listening to our audience and our users. It's kind of how we got this far. So big shout out to everyone who kind of made this day possible and made OpenNode what it is today. And we're excited to continue this journey down with you.
And also thank you guys. You guys already have kind of like, you guys are growing your network effect, and we really appreciate you kind of bringing us on and allowing us to speak to your listeners. It's literally people in the crypto community, in the Bitcoin community, that's been helping us, from day one to get this far. So thank you, and we appreciate what, you guys bringing us on as well.
Big shout out to Afnan and Brandon from OpenNode. Thank you very much for coming on to the show. We learned a lot about the Lightning Network, and we hope that our listeners got a lot out of it too. Make sure to check us out on YouTube and like and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast catcher. We'll see you guys next time.